She hated him more than anyone. Not in passing, not as a joke, but with the kind of bitterness that lingers for decades, silent, simmering, and unforgettable. Hayley Mills was Disney's golden girl, the innocent smile behind Pollyanna, the charming face of The Parent Trap, and the child star every studio wanted. But what no one knew what she hid behind that warm, polished image was that someone on set made her life unbearable. Someone who was supposed to be her mentor, but instead made her feel small, invisible, and broken. The world adored their chemistry on screen, but behind the scenes, it was a cold war. One that left scars Mills would carry long after the lights faded. This is the side of Hayley Mills Disney never showed you, and it all started with one man, Brian Keith. Hayley Mills didn't stumble into fame, she was born into it. The daughter of legendary British actor Sir John Mills and playwright Mary Hayley Bell, her childhood was shaped by scripts, stage lights, and famous last names. Before she ever stepped in front of a camera, the industry already had plans for her. At just 12 years old, she was discovered while at boarding school, though in truth, she was never far from the spotlight to begin with. Director J.S.A.N.I. Lee Thompson cast her in Tiger Bay, where she starred opposite her own father. Most kids are learning algebra at that age. Hayley? She was delivering a BAFTA-winning performance that left critics stunned and studios scrambling. That one film changed everything. Suddenly, she wasn't just a promising talent, she was the talent. And she wasn't just acting anymore. She was representing a brand, a studio, and a kind of polished, innocent perfection that Disney would soon cling to with both hands. But under all the praise and attention, something far more complicated was happening. She was just a kid growing up on set, working with adults who didn't always treat her like one of their own. And as the roles got bigger, the expectations got heavier. And the worst part? The person who'd make it hardest wasn't lurking in the press or the public. He was standing right next to her, smiling for the same cameras. Walt Disney didn't just cast Hayley Mills, she claimed her. After seeing her brilliance in Tiger Bay, he flew her across the Atlantic and placed her at the heart of his live-action empire. And in 1960, Pollyanna made her a global icon. Audiences fell in love with the wide-eyed optimism, the innocence, the smile that could disarm anyone. Hayley didn't just play Pollyanna, she became her. So much so that the world stopped seeing Hayley altogether. To them, she was the character, sweet, cheerful, unshakably positive. Then came The Parent Trap, and suddenly, Hayley wasn't just a star, she was a phenomenon. Playing two characters at once, pulling off twin identities with charm and precision, it was technical magic for the time, but it was her performance that made it unforgettable. Behind the curtain, though, the cracks were forming. Disney had molded her into the perfect product, wholesome, marketable, safe. But Hayley wasn't staying 12 forever. She was growing up quickly. And the more she tried to explore who she really was, the more Disney tightened its grip. She wanted complexity. They wanted smiles. She wanted space to breathe. They gave her scripts that kept her locked in girlhood. And in the middle of all that tension between a teenage girl and a billion-dollar brand was a co-star who didn't see her as talented or even equal. Just a child. An inconvenience. And he made sure she knew it. By the mid-1960s, Hayley Mills had it all: fame, awards, and a place in film history. But what the cameras didn't catch was her growing restlessness. She had outgrown the roles being written for her. The innocent characters, the smiling daughter types, they no longer fit who she was becoming. Hayley wasn't just maturing, she was changing. She craved complexity, depth, and the freedom to explore darker roles. So she broke away from Disney, taking on projects that left people stunned. In The Trouble with Angels, she played a rebellious Catholic schoolgirl. In Twisted Nerve, a chilling psychological thriller, she stepped into a world far removed from Pollyanna's sunshine. Critics called her bold. Disney called her off-brand. Audiences didn't know what to think. Some cheered her evolution, while others recoiled, uncomfortable with seeing the childhood icon as anything but pure. But the bigger struggle wasn't in the press, it was on set. Behind the scenes, she was constantly reminded that she wasn't seen as a peer. Older actors, mostly men, treated her like a child who had wandered into the adult world uninvited, and one of them, in particular, made that message loud and clear. He mocked her, dismissed her, undermined her talent with condescending remarks and subtle digs. And the worst part? The world thought they had perfect chemistry. On screen, he was the warm, fatherly figure audiences adored. Off-screen, he was something else entirely. Brian Keither, co-star in The Parent Trap, was twice her age, seasoned, respected, and, according to many, brutally difficult to work with. For Hayley Mills, he wasn't just a challenging colleague, he was a source of constant discomfort, and eventually, deep resentment. From their very first interactions, something felt off. Keith's attitude toward her was cold, even hostile. He didn't hide his disdain. He called her the Golden Goose, not as a compliment, but as a jab at her rising fame and Disney's obvious favoritism. To him, she was just a spoiled child star riding a wave of studio hype. But what hurt more than the snide remarks were the small, relentless humiliations. During table reads, he'd interrupt her lines. If she asked a question, he'd roll his eyes or dismiss her with a sarcastic comment. Sometimes, he'd mock her British accent, calling it highfalutin nonsense in front of the crew. Everyone laughed. Hayley didn't. She was 14. He was a grown man, and he made sure she knew exactly where he thought she belonged beneath him. It wasn't just about ego, it was about control, and as the pressure of the production mounted, so did the emotional toll. She once told a friend, "He took every opportunity to knock me down a peg, like he hated the idea of me being successful while still a child." There was one moment in particular, never officially confirmed, but whispered about for years, when Keith's temper exploded on set. And it would change everything. It was supposed to be a normal day on set, a lighthearted scene. Cameras ready, crew relaxed. But what happened next would become one of the most whispered about moments in Disney history. Hayley had arrived a few minutes early. She took her place in the folding canvas chair marked with her name, just as she'd done every day for weeks. It was routine, harmless. Until Brian Keith walked in. He saw her in that chair and stopped cold. "That's not your seat," he growled. Hayley looked up, confused. "It's got my name on it," she said softly. He didn't care. In front of the cast, the crew, the director, everyone. He flipped the chair. Hayley tumbled backward, stunned. Not hurt, but humiliated. The set went silent. Then Keith stormed off. No apology, no explanation. Just the sound of Hayley quietly picking herself up off the floor. It was more than a tantrum. It was a message. "You may be the star, but you're still a kid, and I'll remind you whenever I want." From that day on, everything changed. The energy on set, the way people looked at Keith. The way Hayley carried herself, shoulders a little tighter, eyes more cautious. It marked the end of her innocence on that set. And though the incident was never publicly addressed, it lived in whispers passed down through insiders, cast members, even a few rogue biographies. Disney never commented. Keith never admitted it. But Hayley never forgot. Because it wasn't just a chair. It was power. And he made sure she knew who had it. By the time Hayley Mills turned 20, she was desperate to shed her child star image for good. And in 1966, she did something no Disney executive could have predicted. She fell in love with a man 33 years older. His name was Roy Bolting, a respected British film director who had cast Hayley in The Family Way, her first serious adult role. She was stepping into maturity on-screen but off-screen. The relationship raised eyebrows across the industry. She was barely out of her teens. He was in his 50s. And he wasn't just a director, he was a figure of authority, influence, and experience in an industry where power was rarely shared. To some, it looked like a romance. To others, it looked like grooming. But for Hayley, it was a way out. A break from the suffocating good girl label Disney had wrapped around her like shrink wrap. With Roy, she felt seen, understood, grown. They married in 1971. It was the kind of scandal that didn't play out in public feuds or tabloid meltdowns, but it lived in the uncomfortable silences, family tension, quiet judgment. Long stares from industry insiders who didn't dare speak out, but whispered plenty behind closed doors. Together, they bought a windmill in the countryside eyes, an actual windmill, and raised a son, Crispian Mills, who would grow up to become a rock star in his own right. For a while, it seemed Haley had found freedom, art, a life beyond Hollywood expectations. But the age gap didn't disappear. It just got harder to ignore. As Haley's career evolved, so did her sense of identity, and the more she found herself, the more distance grew between them. After 6 years of marriage, they quietly divorced. The public didn't ask questions. They rarely had to. The story told itself. Haley moved forward, again. But something about that relationship, like so many chapters of her life, was marked by the tension between control and independence, between who she was expected to be and who she was trying to become. And behind it all, the emotional residue from her early years, especially from him, was still there, lingering. Haley Mills never staged a public rebellion. There were no headlines screaming, "Disney star melts down," or "Haley exposes the industry." That wasn't her style. Instead, she waged her battle quietly, one bold role, one personal decision at a time. After divorcing Roy Bolting, she didn't retreat. She leaned in. She threw herself into theater, took on gritty roles, and stepped out of the spotlight's safe center into riskier, more meaningful projects. The Family Way had already shocked audiences with its mature themes, but that was only the beginning. She wasn't just trying to act. She was trying to prove to herself and to the industry that she was more than a perfectly packaged childhood icon. That she could be complex, messy, real. And then came another fight. This time it wasn't on a film set, it was in her body. In the late 2000s, Haley Mills was diagnosed with breast cancer. For anyone, that diagnosis is terrifying. But for someone who had lived her entire life under public scrutiny, it was also a test of identity. Would she be seen as fragile, broken, washed up? She didn't let that narrative write itself. She fought and she won. She faced chemo with the same quiet strength she brought to her toughest roles. And when she emerged on the other side, she didn't just return to acting, she returned with more clarity, more depth, and more ownership over her story than ever before. Then, in a move no one expected, she sat down and wrote it all down. Her memoir, Forever Young, wasn't just a nostalgic look back. It was a reckoning. A measured, honest account of the fame machine, the personal sacrifices, and the emotional wounds that had never fully healed. She didn't name names to destroy reputations. She didn't throw punches for the sake of shock. She told the truth, her truth. And in doing so, she reclaimed what had been taken from her so long ago, her voice. But the part that hit the hardest wasn't the cancer, wasn't the divorce, wasn't even the loss of youth. It was what she finally admitted about Brian Keith. And the words she used were ice cold. For years, Haley Mills had bottled up the darkest secret of her childhood, the secret shadow cast by Brian Keith, the man who was supposed to be her protector on the Parent Trap set. In her memoir, she didn't just hint or allude, she confronted it head-on. Brian Keith's behavior wasn't just strict or old-fashioned. It crossed lines no child should ever face. His temper wasn't just a quirk, it was a weapon that left emotional wounds deeper than anyone knew. She wrote about the silence that followed, the fear of speaking out, and the weight of guilt that stayed with her far longer than the abuse itself. Haley's confession wasn't just about exposing a toxic figure, it was about reclaiming her own sanity, her own identity from the trauma that threatened to consume it. By naming her pain, she took back control. And it wasn't easy. The industry had long protected its golden boys, but Haley's bravery cracked that facade. Suddenly, people listened. Suddenly, the conversation changed. Her final confession wasn't a cry for sympathy. It was a battle cry for survivors everywhere, a reminder that silence is not strength, and truth is the first step toward healing. In revealing Brian Keith's dark side, Haley Mills didn't just rewrite her story, she rewrote the rules of Hollywood childhood forever. Haley Mills's story is a complex tapestry of light and shadow. Born into stardom with a smile that captivated millions, she seemed destined for a fairy tale life. Yet behind the cameras and applause lay a battle far more daunting than any role she played. Her legacy is undeniable, a beacon of talent, resilience, and quiet strength. From Disney's darling to a woman who refused to be defined by her past, Haley's journey reminds us that even the brightest stars can carry shadows. But one man's cruelty threatened to eclipse that light. Brian Keith, once her protector, became her tormentor. His shadow loomed large for decades, but Haley's courage in confronting it transformed her story from one of victimhood into a powerful testament of survival. In the end, Haley Mills didn't just grow up on screen, she grew up to speak her truth, shatter silence, and inspire generations to come. Her legacy shines on bright, fierce, and unbreakable.